this here, I could bask in this all day. The sound of the rain, the intermittent chime on the piano, the glow of the moon, the view of the town, and the reflections on the water, it's just serenity. This, on the other hand, what the hell happened here? Busted ass edgy hat with an eye hole tore through, cringe mask and breastplate, dude breakdances when he levels up for Christ's sake. Somebody, at some point in development, had to have had the thought, just once.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
Atelier Ryza 2 Lost Legends and the Secret Fairy is, as the namesake implies, the sequel to Gust and Koei Tecmo's 2019 hit JRPG Atelier Ryza Everdarkness and the Secret Hideout. As a sequel, it's not exactly imperative that you played the first one, though some things towards the end might not make the most sense and the character introductions might feel a little wonky. But aside from that, it is a pretty standalone experience. A code for this game was provided by Koei Tecmo, and I'd like to extend my thanks to them for giving me this opportunity. And I'd also like to offer a huge thank you to fellow YouTuber Canuck and Muso aficionado Chris Gildert for putting me on their radar. If you need any Muso love in your life, I'll leave a link to his channel in the description below. Now, Atelier Ryza 1 was a bit of a turning point for the series. Many of its systems were overhauled drastically, and the changes were largely met with open arms. However, there was definitely still room for improvement. But don't let me convince you that I'm some expert or something. I'm not. Like many others, I only jumped into the series at Ryza 1. And even then, I only got my ass in gear and started the first one when the code for this one dropped in my lap. And let me just say that this day and age, this is not an easy thing to do for physical collectors. North American copies for Atelier Ryza 1 are in very sparse supply. The cheapest Ryza 1 in general that I could find was the PAL Switch version, so if possible, Koei, in honor of the new game and new players jumping on board, let's maybe get a few more of these in circulation, huh? Despite playing Atelier Ryza 1 on the Nintendo Switch, we're going to be looking at the second game on the PlayStation 4. With Ryza 2, the game's director paid very close attention to the criticisms people had of the first, and he addressed a great deal of them. However, there is one place at least where this game rather significantly lags behind the first one. See, sequels in the Atelier universe aren't exactly a common occurrence, and it's very clear when it comes to this game that this sequel exists solely because the first one was popular. It's not exactly because they had more they really wanted or needed to tell with this cast. So let's start there, the one place Ryza 2 really trips over its own feet. Let's look at the story. Now, don't let what I just said spell doom and gloom. Truth be told, there's a number of ways and places this game significantly improves on the storytelling and world building of the first. It's really just the call to adventure that I struggle to accept. 3 years have passed since the events of Ryza 1, and Ryza, our hometown heroine and now a teacher by profession, is getting bored, feeling a longing for adventure once more, and missing her friends who have all gone to live and work abroad. At the height of her boredom, conveniently, in comes Moritz Brunin with a knock at the door. At this point, he's basically just like, yo, check out this weird jewel thing I got. I don't know what it is, so why don't you go find out? And off she goes, mysterious jewel in hand and chicken scratch for leads. In response to a personal invitation that was mailed to her, she immediately sets out to Ashra am Baird, a town where a good deal of her friends and former adventuring party ended up after the events of the last game, and a town that will serve as our central hub. Once here, she meets up with Teo, who's heard rumors and legends of local ruins seemingly lost to time. The two team up to investigate the ruins and hope to just find answers to their other questions along the way. Though somewhat directionless and rather uninspired, the stakes do raise gradually over time as the titular fairy Fee comes into play. Fee is a magical fairy nobody really knows anything about. As Fee shares our journey, it becomes evident that the separation from his homeland is draining all life from his body. For the sake of the plot, Fee is kind of just E.T. Of course, with this comes the team's greatest mission, discovering what Fee is, where he's from, and how to get him back. A question that the local ruins just might hold the answer to. And it's in these ruins that Ryza 2's storytelling actually sees its biggest advancement. When you explore a dungeon enough, it begins to take on new life. The lost and forgotten past begins to awaken in the form of two distinct types of objects that need to be sought out with Ryza's mystical compass. These two objects are topics and memories. Topics tell stories, however, a great deal of the important text has been eroded. This is where the memories come in. Using context clues, the highlighted words, you place the memories into the topics to fill in the blanks and complete the story. Completing topics also rewards you with recipes and SP to help you level up your crafting and gathering skills. Each dungeon has 5 topics. It isn't required that you fill in every topic card and read all the lore they provide to progress, but I would highly recommend you do it. Each dungeon tells an interesting story, and the further into the game you get, the more the lore of each dungeon connects. It was nice seeing that the series had advanced enough to include legitimate dungeons, but it's even nicer to see that they were used to provide a genuine way to keep progressing the story and enrich the game world with lore. Outside of this, there's not much of an overarching story. The rest of the game is made up of character interactions, which they have in spades. This is a pretty standard set of affairs, usually just small, cute interactions with your party members or recurring NPCs, sometimes with side quests. While I enjoyed these social events, I did find myself feeling there were simply too many of them at times. With 55 hours logged, I still didn't see them all. Occasionally I had to stop pursuing them, as some game sessions ended up being nothing but 3 to 4 hours of them back to back without progressing the story. But I am at least very happy to see that they're here. Most other quests in the game, such as those from the cafe's job board, are just filler. They're just there to help you clear some items from your inventory, get some prizes, and raise your social ranks. They recycle on a daily basis and usually don't require you to go out of your way to complete them. Personally, I found them a great way to rake in some quick SP, but never felt too driven to work on them beyond that. That said, I still completed enough of them to max every ranking available through them. So in the end, while Ryza 2 stumbles over its own feet establishing its call to adventure that, while technically working, relies a little bit too much on convenience and lacks the whimsy and youthful ignorance and innocence that made the first game so charming. I found it made up for its shortcomings later with its character interactions and its ongoing lore building through the dungeons. However, there is something rather meta that I really kind of liked about this experience. Going back to the idea that the director really listened to the fans when designing this game and making his improvements, he also listened to them and their outcries of wanting to go on an adventure with this cast of characters again. In a weird meta way, the desires of the fans were grafted onto the main party, and the main party is now something of a mirror to the fanbase, wherein they all share the same desires as us. The desire to see their friends and go out again, something I think now of all times we can relate to more than ever. There's not that much more behind their front-facing motivations than this, but then there isn't usually for us to see our friends either. In a cool way, Ryza 2 is a game by fans, for fans, and even partially about the fans. As much as we play as these characters are also a lot of who we are and everything we wanted. For better or worse, I just found it neat to see. The fans wanted to go on an adventure with this cast of characters again, and this cast of characters wanted to go on an adventure with each other again. And that's something they express in no small amount. Now, you could also take this all as a sort of coming of age story, but a coming of age that we don't normally look at, a coming of age for a different age demographic. For any of you who have finished high school or college, you may have found upon leaving that a lot of the times your friends just aren't as available as they used to be. And for a lot of people, this can be very difficult to get used to. Well, that doesn't mean that you stop making an attempt to see your friends. And really, at the end of it all, that's kind of what Atelier Ryza is about and the message it's trying to get across. Friendship is important. This is a JRPG, we're not gonna beat around that bush. But sometimes to have that friendship, you're actually gonna have to work at it. You're actually gonna have to leave your comfort zone and chase it down. At least I say all this, but then that's just me reading into things that might not actually be intentional in some sort of attempt to develop a deeper appreciation for what's actually here. For all I know, it could just be lazy writing that created what was an interesting effect for me, but either way, I can dig it. Now let's move on from there and look at something where the advancements are much easier to see and appreciate without going out on a limb with strange observations. Let's move into the exploration, the gathering, combat, and the series staple synthesis systems. So let me just start by saying a lot of the big fields and gathering zones, much like the main town, are really eye-catching. High contrast colors, great lighting effects and reflections, and some well-placed objects in addition to the interesting layouts makes everything that little bit more fun to look at while you explore and gather. Which is great for me, because gathering isn't exactly a task I would like to spend all that much time on. But you want to check out my Minecraft world? Anybody? Thankfully, gathering is also a process that has been streamlined. A major improvement over the last game is that when you approach a a gathering node now, you can see in a small bubble above the node what materials you can acquire with the equipped tool. Opening the weapon wheel will also show what you'll gather with the other tools without even bringing them out. I do wish, however, there was an in-game compendium that keeps track of each material and shows which enemy zone and node type they can be gathered from. It can be a bit of a roadblock during synthesis to completely run out of a certain type of item and need to scour the map and dungeons to find more. That all said, thankfully people online have been doing a great job of cataloging the materials. In terms of exploration, things have ramped up a bit as well. New items and tools create variety in how you traverse zones and in how certain areas remain locked from the player. With rope, we can clear large pitfalls and reach new heights. A mount allows us to dig and travel quickly. Torches can create light in dark spaces. A special device can now allow us to dive and explore beneath the water, opening up new areas and new items to gather as well. Combat too has seen its fair share of advancements, and while they seem promising on the surface, I think there's a few steps more to take before it's quite where it needs to be. So to start, you get into battle by encountering enemies in the overworld. Depending on the gathering tool you hit them with prior to battle, they might start with a debuff. You only control one fighter at a time, but with the shoulder buttons you can switch between two others, and if this meter down here is charged, you can swap to a support character as well. Since this is an ATB system, your wait time meter will determine when you can attack. Basic attacks are 3 to 4 hits long, but can be chained with special attacks that utilize your AP. Special attacks are rather limited at first, but over the course of the game you unlock new, stronger versions of them. To use the stronger versions, however, the weaker version must be used first, unlocking the others sequentially. In a way, moving through the tree of attacks like this reminds me a bit of Xenoblade 2's blade attack system, only on a much smaller scale. AP is charged mainly through regular attacks and is a shared resource pool for your entire party. However, your other party members won't use it unless you switch their AI mode from support to aggressive. In aggressive mode, they basically just drain the AP and refuse to do much that doesn't require any. And while it comes in handy in a pinch, I found neither AI mode particularly balanced. I would much rather AP not be a shared resource and the whole AI and AP system rebalanced around that idea. Defending is done in real time, which is definitely a huge plus for me. Holding the block button will stall your wait time meter, but hitting right on the enemy's attack will basically bypass the wait time stall and also reward you with some AP. As you do combat, two other things charge as well: your CC and your tactics level. As the tactics level charges, new attacks become available, as does your max amount of AP. At max tactics level, provided you're far enough into the game, you can also use Fatal Drive, a special super powerful attack that resets your tactics level to 0 and drains your AP completely. CC, on the other hand, is the resource you need in order to use items in battle, such as heals or bombs. Offensive items are especially useful when dealing with enemies' break gauges. When the enemy's break gauge is full, the enemy becomes stunned and unable to use any large attacks that they may have been targeting you with. When using offensive items, synthesis is lightly incorporated too, so you can combine different offensive items for different effects. That's not something I really used though, it never actually felt necessary. Thankfully in Ryza 2 your items aren't actually consumed upon use either, so there's never any worry about conserving them or having to craft more later. Now you might think that that would break difficulty in some way, as using consumables outside of battle would be an infinite resource, but it isn't. They actually solved this one in a pretty clever way. Even when you're outside of battle, CC is still required for consumables. Any CC remaining from a fight is pooled, but only up to 10 points. Now this combat system isn't bad and it has a nice flow to it. However, misguided ideas or attempts at balancing its many moving parts can make it feel really uninteresting at times. Basically, my eyes are only ever glued to a handful of things: my AP, my special attacks, and my support character slot. So this is how I see battle. I don't particularly notice all that stuff going on in the middle. Because the game is generally very easy or can be made incredibly easy through synthesis, it becomes almost nothing but a spam fest, just hitting special attacks until you can't anymore, then switching to your support to keep the chain going. It might be different if you actually got to move your character around and not have them position themselves for attack, or if you got to move around to avoid where the enemy was going to attack next, but you don't. You really ultimately have very little control. It's rare you need to stop to use items or switch to any other characters. At most, I might adjust my target or switch to aggressive mode if I see an enemy gearing up for a strong attack, but that's just not enough. It wasn't until the final dungeon that things got harder, and I was actually trying to make this game more difficult. I synthesized new gear as little as possible, using using beginner's armor and weapons until I was about 40 hours in, and all it really did was make enemies take longer to kill. It didn't require me to use any deeper strategy or play any harder. Now it might look exciting, and visually it is, but gameplay wise, when you really take stock of what you're doing, it's got a ways to go. But before I continue, let me just say, unless I state otherwise, I play my games on standard for the purpose of review. There is a hard mode in this, and that might sound like salvation, but trust me, it's really not. After completing the game, I loaded an old save about halfway through and bumped the difficulty up. The enemies definitely scaled up, but I of course was still using my purposefully underleveled gear. So I spent a small chunk of time crafting new gear, and I was once again overpowered. All changing difficulty seems to affect is changing how much or how often you need to invest in synthesis. Although I can imagine the first 4 to 5 hours of the game being a bit more difficult at the very least, just until you get your alchemy up and running. And speaking of alchemy, let's take a look at that. My analytics tell me you're studying to become alchemist. I'm something of an alchemist myself, you know.
So what exactly is alchemy?
Oh, it's like, combining items to make something new.
Can I see?
Sure. There it is. Alchemy, in its highest form.
What does it do?
So I can't show you right now. It has a very specific and limited application, but trust me, it's extremely useful.
It just looks like a wine bottle with an eraser on it.
I mean, it kinda is, but it's, it's... Oh my god, what's that? You're supposed, over there?
If I do that, you're just gonna run away.
The alchemy is a great deal like it was before, and sadly, like before, the tutorials are woefully inadequate, so I'll do my best to lightly explain things. But before we look at the crafting, let's look at the new skill tree. This right here is a great new addition to the game. As you get SP from completing missions or filling in the topic cards in dungeons, you can use that SP to unlock skills on the skill chart here. These skills unlock your synthesis abilities, so not everything will be available at once. It also unlocks your recipes and your gathering abilities. It's mostly up to you what you unlock and in what order, so there's a lot more freedom here than there was before, and there's a lot less blind grinding through synthesis levels. There's not much here, it's a standard skill tree, so let's just move straight on now to the alchemy. Basically, we start by selecting a recipe. You can choose to have the game auto-create them in high or low quality, but unless it's a key item or needed for a side quest, I would opt to do it manually. It's good to really get in there and see the branching paths of each recipe, as they do lead to new recipe discoveries. So when we start crafting, you basically have all these loops here, these circles, and you can see on each one how they'll affect your end product. Higher quality, more traits, increased stats, so on and so forth. Each loop requires different types of ingredients and different elements. The element required is pictured by the color on the inner ring. If you don't have the element required, you can get items to swap the color of the inner ring, but I found little need for these. To gain the rewards promised in each loop, you'll need to fill the element bar pictured here. When looking at the materials that you're going to fill this loop and this element bar with, the number in this corner here shows how much of its pictured element or elements the material is worth. Some loops remain locked until you meet the stated requirements to open them by filling the other loops. Not every loop needs to be filled in to create your item, however, but some of them certainly do. The more loops you fill in, of course, and the higher quality ingredients you use, the stronger your end item will be. If you unlocked trait slots while synthesizing, then the traits listed in the ingredients you used can be carried over into the final product, but only up to 3 of them per creation. You can only use so many ingredients while crafting, so you have to invest in your loops wisely. Once a product is done, however, you can also rebuild it and add more ingredients to it to strengthen it up at a cost to gems. Gems can be gained in a number of ways, though the further into the game, the more likely you are to be converting old gear and old materials into them. Gems are also useful for item duplication, which is an absolute godsend, allowing you to just create one single high quality and potent item or piece of armor and replicate it to your heart's content. Once weapons and armor are built, you can also take them to the local blacksmith blacksmith to infuse them with other items, raising their core stats a significant amount. There's even more systems than this, such as essence purification, but those are things you'll just have to learn as you go and as you need them, which, unless you go really hard into your crafting, you probably won't. Synthesis runs deep and looks complicated, but it's really not as complex as it seems. Menus and tutorials just create a bit of a learning curve. Most of your time synthesizing won't even be used in creating your weapons exactly, but rather in pre-planning for them and creating high-quality ingredients to craft your weapons with. It's a good system, it just needs to be a little more readable is all. For those really not into the crafting side of the game, as I said before, it is a very easy game, so if you really don't want to do it, you can make it through most of the game without getting into this very deep. And thus we arrive at our final stop. We looked at the story and the gameplay and we've seen great improvements, but also room to expand and do more with what they've already started. So let's look now at some of the technical aspects and bring this review to what am I doing with my hands? Let's bring this review to a close. So we already looked at a few of the maps and just how gorgeous they are, and I gotta say, it adds a lot to the experience. So many areas just look so lush, colorful, and full of life. The advancements to the lighting, weather, and reflections are incredibly evident, and it all makes the world an absolute joy to trek around. The dungeons, on the other hand, a lot of these feel comparatively lackluster. This is partially just due to what they are though, old, dilapidated, musty, and stale abandoned ruins. But I do feel the average dungeon design could have been improved. Still though, some of the dungeons do look quite nice, and the environments reinforce the history you uncover about the place, so it's not really a huge deal. Characters typically look really nice too, with the exception of a few over-designed characters like the aforementioned Clifford. Returning characters have new designs that reflect how they've matured, though Ryza is still her usual aloof-looking self, and I gotta say, I like it. The OST is fantastic. I absolutely love the battle theme. It summons the textures and feel of one of my favorite past Gust compositions, Overdose from Blue Reflection. This music definitely isn't what most people think of when it comes to traditional JRPG soundtracks, but it absolutely works for these characteristically Gust-style games. The voiceovers, they're all pretty good too, but they are Japanese only. And I know I rag on Clifford for his design and animations, but his voice actor delivers some of the best world chatter in the game.
わらべ歌ってそれ信憑性ねえだろ。
でも空間島のわらべ歌だって
I gotta say, the game runs fairly well too. It's pretty stable, I never experienced any crashes or glitches, and load times are generally pretty quick. Overall, this is a solid display from the Atelier team. But where do I land with the whole thing in closing? Well, Atelier Ryza 2 shows great strides and advancements for the series, but these advancements also make it painfully obvious what areas they didn't exactly try the hardest in. With the series inching closer and closer to greatness, I look forward to where it's going to go from here. With a few more tweaks and a real focus on telling a compelling story, I think the Atelier series can finally have an actual Final Fantasy VII or Persona 5 style moment, breaking the series through into the mainstream. Or at least, if not as popular as those, maybe it can eventually compete sales-wise with an Ys title. Gust isn't exactly known for spending a lot of time or money developing a game, and these yearly turnarounds are how they've mostly stayed afloat. But with the success of Ryza 1, I feel this is the time for them to go all out and really make the effort. For as far as the Atelier series has come, it's almost painful that Ryza 2 isn't even better. I think we all know the studio is capable of it, so here's to hoping they meet their true potential sooner rather than later, as they really are on a track for greatness, if only they would pace themselves enough to reach out and grasp it. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, my late but hopefully somewhat helpful or interesting thoughts on Atelier Ryza 2. I just want to say thanks again to Koie Tecmo for this opportunity, and thanks once more to Chris Gildert for setting me up with them. If you guys found this video helpful or useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to all of my socials and my Patreon support page are in the description below, and as always, folks, thanks for watching. Pow! You're dead. 'Cause I shot ya.